I moved back from US to India in 2009, and I came back recently to the US to handle this responsibility with the IMF. In 2022. So I think of myself actually, as an Indian.
When you are executive director at IMF, what is the day in life of Subramanian? Do you still spend time with your SPSS statistics package, running models? Are you?
No.
What? Please.
No.
That is so 90s, isn't it?
State out. Yeah. See, that I think using a stata or some of that, I think I would have stopped it maybe about 10 years back, because as you become a senior sort of academic, right, then you do you do more of the value added stuff, which is you basically do the writing, you come up with the idea, some of the junior co-authors then stuff that I myself had done when I was an assistant professor. You do the empirical analysis, so you do the data, etc. So today that is not there. So I think the most important, we're all common people. We live common lives. Just because someone has a certain position, life doesn't change. It's just the kind of activities that are there actually change. So at the IMF, actually mostly I'm spending time on board meetings because it's an executive board. So I'm lucky. I actually stay very close by to my to my office. So I come home for lunch. This role actually, because I'm in charge of not only India but Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. And Sri Lanka and Bangladesh have been actually going through IMF 8 programs. So I mean, my wife many times actually sort of mentions that somehow when I joined as a CA, the economy was basically GDP growth was declining, and here I joined as the IMF, and then both Sri Lanka and Bangladesh actually are, having economic trouble. So, I mean,
so tell us a bit about your role currently. I think that will set the background why you have to travel.
So, see, the IMF board, IMF has about 200 members, and these 200 members are actually represented through their, executive directors. So there are 24 board members, representing. So the G7, for instance, has, the United States has only one. So the executive director, the ED for United States only represents US. That's how it is for all the G7 members. But for the other countries, we basically represent a portfolio of countries. As I said, in my case, it's India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. Because, IMF basically aid is
You're like one of 200.
No, I'm not one of 200. I'm one of 24.
You're one of 24 for 4 countries together.
So
G7 have one each.
Yes, but some of the African countries, for instance, the EDs, they may actually, and others may have, 20 countries, 20 small countries that they're part of, they're responsible for. So I am actually responsible for 4. So it's an executive board. This is different from the normal, corporate boards that are strategic, where they meet. The corporate boards are non-residential. The independent directors and other directors come for basically the board meeting. Here, every decision has to be approved by the board. So that's how the thing. So board meetings and both Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, I have to go and see how the program is happening. I tend to sort of also travel there to get a sense of which sections maybe are benefiting or not benefiting, etc. To be able to, because much like venture capital funding, IMF funding is also given in stages. So and therefore how the program is doing is something that I have to check, because I have to sort of present to my board colleagues on how the program is going, that's convince them to give out the next tranche of the funding. So that's part of
and I'm going with what your wife was saying. How long have you been representing these 4 countries?
Now I joined the board in November of 2022. So first November.
And that's when Sri Lanka has started looking up, and Bangladesh.
Yes, so Sri Lanka, some of the economic troubles started in slightly before I joined. I think July, August of 2022. But their first aid, actually, the aid was given in March of 2023, and Bangladesh also actually the aid went in end Jan or maybe early Feb of 2023. So these happened after I joined.
And so, as I understand, your job is about how does this aid get used? Is it getting used effectively?
That's one part of it. So there are, unlike, for instance, other lenders, right? Traditional lender takes some collateral for lending, or they may basically escrow a salary account, etc. When, IMF lends to sovereigns, and therefore, they can't take anything as collateral, nor can they escrow anything. Therefore, IMF has to ensure some program conditionalities. For instance, it may be, this much reserves, this much fiscal deficit. These are some of the structural reforms that need to be done, etc., etc. So whether those are being done, sort of meeting with the senior functionaries in the government, usually the finance minister, and the senior bureaucrats, etc., interacting with them to understand what's happening, how's the program going, so that I can actually update my board, and then eventually the board meeting on that, review, actually I have to lead it.
Who appoints an executive director for IMF?
So it actually is. It's appointed by every country or portfolio of countries. So in our case, actually, it is the 4 portfolio of countries. But India being the largest shareholder, India has basically the maximum say in this.
Okay. So is this like actually an allocation of shares? Like when you say largest shareholder, is it like India has 60% voting rights and
Yes. So as the 200 members, slightly less than 200 members that are part of the IMF, each one of them has, a certain quota in the, so the US, for instance, has slightly more than 15%. Each of the others, when you put it all together, there's basically a certain amount of stake, right? So in the 4 countries that are part of my portfolio, India has the highest quota. And so the way the 2 Bretton Woods institutions, which is, IMF and World Bank, both the executive directors are from India. What is called the alternate executive director, which is actually the number 2 in the, so in IMF, it is from Sri Lanka. In World Bank, it is from Bangladesh. That's how it is balanced. And then Bhutan has a advisor, because Bhutan's stake is significantly lower. So that's how this has been worked.
So help me understand this. You're part of a 24 group of people who are the executive board of directors of IMF, which is different from corporate boards. You guys are making the executive decisions, but you need an organizing structure to support you making this decision.
Yes. There is actually
about I saw that you gave Bangladesh over $1 billion.
Yes.
And Sri Lanka over $300 million. So these are large sums of money which are being allocated.
Correct.
There's a lot of fiduciary responsibility. So what's the organization structure below you to support this?
So there's basically as in any other organization, there's a management, right? And then there's staff. It's the staff that end up doing all the work in and they present with the sort of their analysis, and then the IMF is actually, and equally the World Bank is, these are sort of formal, these are, you can think about these are the international bureaucracies. Okay, so written responses to every decision have to actually be put up, so we have to put in written responses, and then in the actual board meeting, then a formal intervention is also done. The intervention also gets recorded. So that's how the rest of it, in some sense, if you think about it, actually it's like any other organization. There's a management, there is a staff that basically reports to the management, and some parts to the board, like that. But the important difference here is that in a corporate board, the board is basically just strategic, doesn't have to approve day-to-day decisions. But in the case of, for instance, if you take a bank, right? Whether it's going to lend to a particular entity or not is a decision that is taken by the investment committee of that, which is comprised of management. That's not a decision that is taken by the board. The board would basically say, these are your criteria. This is how we basically should go about, let's say, asset classification or broad strategic things. The actual executive decision is actually taken by the management. In the case of the IMF, it is basically every decision. So, for instance, whether the next tranche has to be given, to a particular country is something that is actually presented to the board, and then the board approves. So, all executive decisions actually have to be
Sure. So, help me understand this. So, you said leading or like trying to direct the economy of these 4 countries. Then, how
I would not say. I wouldn't say I'm trying to direct the economy. No, that I think would be.
Sure. I think that's a wrong. Yeah, but intervene if there's problems. Intervene if they need international help.
Well, actually, again, even intervene may be a little sort of stronger. Persuade to basically persuade the authorities to intervene.
Persuade the authorities to make decisions which might be more economically research oriented and.
Yeah. So in other words, let me put it this way, right? The executive director is representing the authorities, on the board, of the IMF.
So you are actually representing the Ministry of Finance of these 4 countries?
Well, not just Ministry of Finance. Actually, Ministry of Finance is where the maximum interaction is with, but you're actually representing these countries.
You're representing these countries. So, but do you have your own team of 20 professionals that you can give a research process to?
I do have a team. Actually, the team is comprised of people from these countries basically. So I have, for instance, people from, as I said, the alternative executive director. He is from Sri Lanka. I have people from Reserve Bank of India. I have people from Ministry of Finance.
And are they working in the host countries, or do they come work with you?
They work here, actually. They work in Washington, D.C., my office. So everybody, basically all the people who are working are residential here.
Okay. So they get deputed from RBI. So exactly. From RBI, 2 years deputed to work at that.
RBI, Ministry of Finance, they get deputed basically.
How big is that team that's working with you or below you?
So here actually the ED officers have about, you would say about 10 people, so that's basically the, all seniors. So it's sort of top heavy in that sense. But, we do hire consultants, for instance, to do some of the, the research work. To be able to help us with, but the actual sort of staff of which does that, the research, etc., is the staff of the IMF.
Okay, and how big is the staff of IMF? Well, help me understand, because my knowledge of IMF is limited to Wikipedia, right? But I'm actually talking to someone who is one of 24 at that.
I haven't checked the actual numbers. Maybe 1,500 or so, I think, but. There's staff across all the member countries. There are, what is called, there's a residential representative, what's called a res rep. There are people, there are training centers in these, so just to, I think, give a better sense. So there are 3 main activities that basically the fund, International Monetary Fund does. One is macro surveillance, actually, of, every country. There is a presentation on, so the team assesses the macro. That includes fiscal, monetary policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, overall macros. What's the growth looking like? What are the any aspects of concern? Those are things that the macro assessment is one key part. Second is basically capacity building, and that's so training is a very important part of. And third is basically the lender of last resort. When a country gets into, a difficulty, take for instance, India, in 1991, we had less than a few weeks of, maybe a couple of weeks of imports. So we were really running low on foreign exchange. So IMF basically gave a loan to India, right? And typically at concessional rates compared to, market borrowing. Because what happens is that when a country, like for instance, we take Sri Lanka, right? Sri Lanka is a better example, because they went through those economic troubles. Commercial lenders will not be willing to lend them, foreign exchange, right? Because they're actually, in difficulty. So that's when the fund becomes the lender of last resort. And it's that lender of last resort function that is basically what part of which I have to be very intensively involved because it's done, over tranches. In return for that, that's when the fund basically says, okay, here we would want your fiscal deficit to be basically in this threshold. Maybe you have to try and increase your reserves, foreign exchange reserves by X. You maybe these kind of reforms you have to do to increase your tax buoyancy, your overall tax to GDP ratio, these kind of structural reforms that you need to do, etc. So that's sort of, you recall in India, PV Narasimha Rao of course did it, but that crisis basically was converted into an opportunity, but it was also part of the IMF conditionalities at that time, to be able to sort of open up the market, do structural reforms.
Where does IMF get the funds from? So when IMF allocated
member countries, and also like any other bank, right? On the loans that are given, there are basically interest that's charged. So that of course at concessional rates, but those are and then of course the members' contributions.
Actually, that's the same question I was about to ask. Is where's the inflow, where's the outflow? So the outflow, we know. Outflow goes to countries and with conditions.
Yeah. Outflow also includes staff costs, salaries and all.
Are the conditions... So if you're lending to Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or India, hopefully not, but yeah, then are they with a low condition?
33
or
years.
Are they with low interest rate, no conditions?
No. There are conditionalities. Of course, there are conditionalities.
And so conditionality is the interest rate, or is there something else?
No. There's actually there is an interest that is charged as well. There are various kinds of there are what are called surcharges and many sort of getting.
For example, I heard that you can't give too much subsidy on say fuel and then stuff like that. Like you might have to reduce the subsidy you give in fuel and so on. Like,
yes,
you got to make the economy work.
Exactly. So to be able to, part of it is, see, as I was saying, the International Monetary Fund, because it's a lender of last resort, typically the fund comes in, gets into the act, a relationship between a country and the International Monetary Fund happens when the economy is, sort of in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So part of the process is therefore to, as part of the program, to prescribe things that will help the economy to turn around,
structural reforms.
Yeah, structural reforms.
Yeah, because I think
so. Here's my question, and we are all MBAs here. Of course, you're like way ahead. You're like a PhD in, especially in financial economics. So everything has a price to pay. If IMF is giving anyone, what is the price that country is paying them?
The explicit one is, of course, the interest that you're paying, right?
That interest is like a soft interest.
Yes, it's a soft interest. The other point, which actually also I want to look, I think when you said democracy is our flaw, see, there are two points that I have to mention here. Mm-hmm. That for one, first is democracy and capitalism aren't great. But everything else is far worse.
Absolutely. These are the best of the options we have.
Number one. Number two, which is, and you have to look at it more philosophically, that every institution that actually humans have built will have human characteristics, which is, we humans are not perfect. We have many of, all of us, or many of us actually, in fact, all of us have positives, but we do have some negatives as well. So, any institution that we build, whether it's democracy, capitalism, any organization, family, there will be negatives. And I think it is a human trait also to just focus on the negatives rather than on the positives. So, and that is why, again, I actually don't like this characterization of basically democracy has flaws. No, democracy has phenomenal positives as well. And, capitalism has phenomenal positives as well. But much like any human being, there are some negatives too. Those have to, they coexist.
First of all, I completely agree with you that what we have in democracy is the best, and what we have in capitalism is the best of all the economic systems we have. I also fundamentally agree with you that we evolved to focus on the negatives. We evolved to focusing on the negative and not the positives, because
in a sense, I'll just sort of nuance it a little bit, which is being aware of negatives
Yes.
is useful because it basically, it motivates to improve yourself.
Yes.
But focusing on negatives actually is that is different.
Yes.
That is, want to focus on your positives so that that gives you the self-confidence to be able to say, if I have been able to acquire these positives, these negatives also I will be able to overcome. I think that's so I wouldn't use the language of focus on negatives, being aware of. That's the way I would actually. I think it is important, therefore, to always, because you're also venture capitalists and people who are actually looked up to. It's important to always put these in that perspective, saying that if it's imperfect, these constructs that we have of perfection is actually what we aspire to. But just because there is some negative doesn't make it bad, or doesn't make it there is no other institution that or compared to democracy or capitalism that humans have evolved, which is actually as close to perfection, not perfect, but as close to perfection as any other compared to anything else.
Yeah.